Good evening, everybody. We are just going to wait one more minute for 5:30 to arrive and have a few more participants, and then we'll be commencing the second webinar in the Build Smarter series. Well, as we're letting people in and begin to attend, I just wanted to do a brief introduction to this evening's session. I'm Itwal Pinder, and I'm the Recovery Coordinator for the United Nations Development Program Office here in the Bahamas. To start us off, UNDP has been working on many areas since Dorian impacted Grand Bahama and Abaco now well over a year ago. One of the most harsh realities that came after that storm was the destruction of such a large proportion of our buildings. During assessments made post-hurricane, it became clear that the homes which had been built to code did fare fairly well, but unfortunately a large proportion had not been built to our current national standards. The Bahamas does have one of the most progressive building codes in the region, but Dorian showed that there is a better need to assist individuals in how they're going to be able to meet those standards, which led to the Ministry of Public Works creating their new Guide to Housing Standards for the Bahamas, which you can download the PDF of, and I'm going to insert that link into the chat here if you are interested in downloading it. It's an easy to follow guide to the building code of the Bahamas, which we hope will help homeowners, contractors, and subcontractors in building resilient homes. As another part of that work, two fellow Bahamians, Nick Sims and Eugene Thompson, who you can see here, were hired to lead our technical assistance centers in Grand Bahama and Abaco in conjunction with both the DRA's Small Home Repair Program and Rotary Clubs of the Bahamas. Unfortunately, COVID has really impacted our ability to conduct as much hands-on activities as we had aimed to. And as a result, we're conducting this Build Smarter webinar series where you can hear from the experts and then ask them questions about your specific rebuild project. As way of introduction, Nick Sims is a licensed professional structural engineer with 26 years of experience in the Bahamas and 17 years in particular for Abaco, where he lived many years. Eugene Thompson is an architectural technician and is someone who actually grew up in Grand Bahama. He has over 30 years experience working along the length and breadth of GB. So just to provide you with a little bit of information on how the evening session is going to work, Nick and Eugene are going to provide you with a presentation on the key points related to resilient construction for, we are dealing with timber wall framing today. And at any point during the presentation, if you would like to ask a question, you can type it right here into the Q&A portion of the webinar. Otherwise, after they are done, you can indicate that you would like to verbally speak just by raising your hand. There's a raised palm is one of the icons next to your name. If you click on that, I will unmute you and you'll be able to ask a question directly to them. Also, if you are one of the individuals watching via Facebook, please know that I am also monitoring the questions being asked there, so you can just write into the Facebook feed and we will ask the questions for you. As a minor other note, I will have a little poll for you at the end of the session, so please do wait around to just respond to that. And Eugene, I believe you are going to be taking us away.
Good evening, all. Welcome once again to the Build Smarter webinar series. Thank you for finding the time to take part in this training series. Again, this is something probably best done face-to-face with an audience, but circumstances do not allow this at this time. This week, we are incorporating more videos and diagrams so that the presentation is hopefully more informative and easier to follow. So, to reiterate, the intent of this training series is to provide an easy to follow condensed presentation of the requirements of the Bahamas Building Code, the guidelines in the Build Back Better manual, as well as best building practices to help builders as well as homeowners in Abaco and Grand Bahama rebuild their homes so they are hurricane resilient. The Build Back Better manual was developed post-Dorian and is a Ministry of Works document drawn from the Bahamas Building Code and developed in collaboration with the United Nations Development Program, Jamaica office, the University of the Bahamas, and the Disaster Reconstruction Authority. It is hoped that from this training, builders will have some key steps in the building process reinforced for them and perhaps learn some things that improve their practice. Likewise, it is hoped that homeowners will become familiar with the key steps of the building process so they are more informed and aware of what is likely a very important and the largest investment of their lives. And so thus allied as a team with the builders in achieving homes that are hurricane resilient. The training this evening is the second of several in a series focused on the construction of single-story homes in the Bahamas. Again, this afternoon, we will be looking at timber framed walls. Next slide. Timber framed walls. Today, we are presenting the prescriptive method for construction of timber frame walls for simple single-story homes. While it is always best to include a professional architect and engineer in the design of your home, this method will produce suitably hurricane resilient walls for the majority of single-family homes. Slide 3. The materials. Framing lumber. All framing lumber should be pressure treated to guard against termites. The code requires that standard framing lumber is rated number 2 grade, southern yellow pine or better. The grade, that is number 2, refers to the strength rating of the lumber. Fortunately, the vast majority of framing lumber imported by local hardware stores is pressure treated southern yellow pine. So by default, the builder and the homeowner ends up purchasing the correct lumber suitable for framing in the Bahamas and as per our building code. A typical lumber stamp looks similar to this. There you would see the markings. Next slide. Plywood. All wall sheeting plywood is to be a minimum of 1/2 inch thickness. Plywood must be exterior grade classification if permanently exposed to outdoor locations, which means it is capable of withstanding repeated wetting and drying cycles or long-term exposure to weather. The typical CDX plywood available at hardware stores is not exterior grade, but rather exposure 1 grade, which means it is made with adhesive that is moisture resistant, and it can withstand short lengths of exposure to moisture. The length of time that plywood is exposed to moisture during an efficiently run construction project through to completion is considered to qualify for use of CDX plywood. However, for the sake of better quality, peace of mind, and a common occurrence of lengthy, inefficient construction activity within a very humid climate that often has very heavy rains, then exterior grade should be considered for the wall sheeting. Ideally, the plywood should also be pressure treated to guard against termite attack. Ensure the plywood bears the stamp of the approved certifying agency. For the Bahamas Building Code, this is the American Plywood Association, APA, and the applicable stamp for exterior grade sheeting rated plywood that is pressure treated as well looks like this. There you go. Next slide. Nails, bolts, screws, and metal connectors. Use only hot dipped galvanized HDG nails, or best to use, if it can be afforded, is stainless steel grade 316 nails, bolts, and metal connectors. This ensures suitable protection against the always present conditions for corrosion on small islands, as well as these are the specified types of materials that are compatible with the chemicals and metals used in the process of manufacturing pressure-treated lumber and plywood, such that there are no adverse reactions that would occur. Of course, nails, bolts, and metal connectors will be in contact with or embedded within pressure-treated framing lumber and plywood sheeting. Ensure as well the proper gauge and length nail is used for each connection joint and type of metal connector. Each connection joint and metal connector requires a specific nail to achieve its design rated strength. Use of the incorrect nail can reduce the strength rating and thus effectiveness of metal connectors, at times to the extent of being dangerous to the occupant of the dwelling. A very common historical error made by builders is using the incorrect nail specification for a given metal connector. For example, using 8-penny nails for Simpson's H2.5 hurricane clip instead of the 10-penny 1.5-inch nail that Simpson's specifies for this clip. And here you will see a slide showing the various types of nails. You have a 16-penny common nail, and it shows its length. You have a sinker, you have a 10-penny common nail, you have the screw, you have the 16-penny 2.5-inch, and it goes all the way down. You have the ring shank, and we'll come to that in a few seconds, and the 8-penny common nail. So there are many different types. Be sure to use the proper one as specified by the manufacturer for the connection that you're trying to achieve. Next slide. Use of ring shank nails is recommended, particularly for nailing on plywood sheeting due to its greater holding power. Ring shanked nails are those that have ribbing along the length of its shank. And again, here's a very good illustration of what a ring shanked nail looks like. And then over to the right, we have an illustration. On the left side of that, we have the common smooth shank common nail. And there's an example in the center of a spiral shank nail, which is stronger than the common nail. And then to the far right is the ring shank nail, which is the strongest type nail that we can use. Hopefully this has helped you. And now we'll turn it over to Nick.
Hi, good evening. I'm going to move on to the framing of the walls now, the process of it. The process of framing the walls is not complicated, but it is detail saturated and requires much more time than available in the format of this training series to go through all the intricate steps of framing up walls for single-story homes. For a thorough overview of the detailed process of framing of timber walls, the following, you see the link there, is suitable to watch. It's about a 1 hour long. It's very, it goes through all the steps. There are some slight tweaks to the wall framing in this training video because it comes from the Northeast of America. And the tweaks would be necessary to accommodate the requirements of timber framing for hurricane resilient homes. But the essentials of the process of constructing a system of walls for a single story home is the same. This evening, we will present a very broad overview of the process of framing walls, in which we will primarily focus on the aspects and details of wall framing with respect to achieving structural robustness that will be useful for homeowners to know as they work along with their builder, as well as information that will be useful for builders in reinforcing and perhaps improving their practice. Next slide, please. So the first step really begins with the sourcing of the lumber. You want to check and make sure that all the lumber and separate the lumber into groups according to their straightness. You want to use the longest, straightest pieces for the floor and wall plates. You might want to skip to the next slide. Thank you. Then the next straightest for the studs. Then the next straightest after that for the jack studs and cripple studs. Then after that, the next straightest for the headers and sills of the windows and door framed openings. Then the least straight for blocking. So that diagram there quickly shows, for those who are not familiar with those terms, that this is a door and window openings. This is schematic. It kind of shows and labels the elements that I just described. So you notice at the bottom and at the top of the wall are the wall plates, the top plates and the sole plates. The uninterrupted studs, what was called common wood studs. The studs into which the header frames, and the header is basically a beam over an opening to transfer weight, force around an opening. And then the jack studs is what the header rests upon. The cripple studs is what goes above the header or below a sill. And the sill you see over there in the window opening is at the bottom of a window. The blocking is the continuous horizontal members that fit between the studs. And so that's a quick overview of the terminology typically used with wall framing. Next slide, please. Ideally, it's best to work with lumber that is all straight. A good way for achieving this is just a side note and a tip. A good way for achieving this is to inspect the lumber at the lumber store and hand select only straight pieces. To be sure, this is time consuming, but it's well worth the effort, as it ultimately saves time on site where it is more bare. And it will substantially improve the quality of the walls in being straight and plumb and level, ideal for pitching a roof off of, as well as for final finishes, including sheetrock hanging and finished carpentry, installation of windows and doors, and so forth. Overall quality in construction is achieved with taking care to ensure quality in each and every step of the process, however insignificant it may seem, and it begins right with the sourcing and selection of lumber. Okay, so we're going to move on, and the next step is to lay out the location of the walls on the slab, on the floor. The exterior walls are located along the perimeter of the ground floor slab, and interior walls obviously are located internally. The layout requires use of a measuring tape, chalk lines, and pencils. And basically, you are transferring information from your building set of plans to your concrete slab. You want to ensure, as you lay out, that the squareness of the layout is checked often and is confirmed finally before installation of any walls. And the squareness of the walls is something that refers to the nearness to a perfect 90-degree angle of the corners of the walls. That's outside corners as well as inside corners. After that, you want to go ahead and identify the longer exterior walls, and those are the ones that will be framed first. You want to also determine a sequence of the framing of the walls so that you avoid conflict between walls after they are built on the slab and then need to be erected into position. You don't want to have a conflict with your walls as you go to hoist it, because it's just very inefficient to try to deal with that at that time. All right, next slide, please. The next step is we're going to lay out the framing of the plates. And so from the sorting of the lumber, you want to pick from the longest, straightest pile and pull the lumber needed for the bottom and top plates of the longest walls and lay them on the slab. The layout of the on the plates, you then lay out on the plates where the wall openings occur and where all jack, king, cripple, and common wall studs will be. This is a process that builders are very familiar with. Studs are to be 2x6s spaced at 16-inch centers. You want to determine on the floor perimeter where the ends of the plates will fall and install 5/8 diameter bolts in the slab at either side of where the ends of the wall plates will fall, as well as on the adjacent side of king studs at openings. Use expansion bolts or bolts secured by epoxy grout. You want to locate these bolts 3 inches from the ends of the plates and 2 inches adjacent to the king studs. These are bolts in addition to those 5-inch diameter bolts spaced at 36 inches on center that were cast into the slab during the pouring of the slab. These additional bolts can be cast into the slab as well, but it really requires significant and involved planning and layout prior to the pouring of the floor, and therefore it may be more efficient to go ahead and install at the time that you're laying out the plates. Next slide, please. So this is a short video. It just kind of shows bolts that were cast into the slab. You see them 3 feet on center. And these are bolts that is going to secure the sole plate to the slab sufficiently long for the plate to slip over. Okay, then we're going to move on to the framing and installation of the walls. So you install the bottom plate first over the bolts. Now remember the sole plate is actually 2 plates, one upon the other. You drill holes in that bottom plate 1/16 inch larger than the diameter of the bolts, and then you slip the plates over the bolts. The metal straps connecting the bottom of the studs to the wall plates, the sole plates, can be installed at the underside of the bottommost plate with equal ends left on either side of the plate for folding up and nailing off to the studs after the installation of the framed up wall. And you want to use straps that are at least 20 inches long. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a short video that shows another option for installing straps at the bottom of walls. And what this is, it straps directly to the concrete slab. You notice the straps are at 16 inches centers. That's because the studs are at 16-inch centers. So this is another way to do it. I will point out that you can see that instead of nails, obviously Tapcons we use. These are concrete screws. Those are not hot dip galvanized or stainless steel. So this is an example of an error made in construction. Those types of Tapcons will quickly corrode exposed to the exterior like that. And you also notice that all the holes in that strap have not been filled. So it's there's a couple errors right there you want to look out for when you are building your house. Next slide, please. Okay. So here we're moving on. Then you move on to framing up the walls. And as you frame them up on the floor, you want to leave out the blocking and the uppermost top plate. And remember now, the top plate also has 2 plates, one upon the other. So you leave out the uppermost top plate. And then once you've got that each wall section framed up on the slab, you want to tilt up and hoist into position to where it needs to be. And then you install, you hoist it and put it on top of the bottommost plate. And then you want to brace it in position temporarily. Then you just work around the building, installing all the walls in the sequence that you had previously planned. As during the framing of the walls that you want to pay particular attention that you use the correct nails, specification and number of nails per each joint. And this is a quick list of the nails per joint requirements. And this can be found in the Bahamas Building Code. It's listed very similar to this. So you notice that a lot of those nails are 16 penny nails. So those from the list that was the diagram previously shown, the 16 penny nails were the largest nails. And again, it's just an additional note, use ring shack nails whenever possible. Next slide, please. So once you've got all the walls up, you want to go ahead and check plumb, level, and square, basically do a quality check, and then rebrace as needed once you've achieved those positions of plumb, level, and square. Then only after you've done that and the walls are nicely braced in position and are correct, then you want to go ahead and install your uppermost top plate. Nailing in place with 2 number 16 penny nails at 24 inches centers. And then you want to clinch the nails. And clinching means after you've nailed through, the pointy end is going to come out. The nail end is going to come out of the other side of the plate. You want to go and you want to knock that nail tight, bend the nail basically tight against the material. So it acts like a clamp as well. You want to ensure the butt ends of our uppermost plate, top plates, do not coincide with the butt ends of the lower top plate. So you want them to lap, basically. Then you want to go ahead and install the nuts and washers to the bolts at the sole plates, so that the walls are being held down. The washers it's important to use a robust washer with those bolts, and they should be 1/8 thick and 1.5 inch diameter. And you want to leave, the bolts need to be long enough so at least 2 threads of the bolt are left exposed after the nut has been tightened down. Next slide, please. Okay, after that, you want to go ahead and install your blocking. So the blocking is where you want to locate where the long edges of the plywood wall sheathing will fall on the walls. In other words, the plywood is run horizontally across the studs, and you want to install continuous blocking at those locations. Now, the blocking should be all in one line, very important, and nailed in position with 2 number 8 penny nails through the stud face into each end of the blocking. The blocking is positioned so that it catches the edges of rows of plywood from below and above. Next slide, please. Okay, so this shows blocking all in one line. So this is fairly good. So that piece of blocking on the right is slightly out of line. You can see some gaps between the blocking and the stud, but this is a good representation of blocking all in one continuous horizontal line. So that is correct from that point of view. Next slide, please. Now, this is blocking as is very commonly done. It is an error. It's obviously not in one line. It steps back and forth. And the reason that's done like that is because it's just simpler to nail like that. And if you notice, if you look in that central bay, this shows where the studs are 16 inch. You notice, you see the plywood joint right there in that bay on the right. Therefore, both pieces of plywood above and below are not being caught by that blocking. So that blocking is not assisting with adding to the stiffness of the walls. So this is a very good example of what not to do. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we're gonna install the metal straps at the tops of the walls. These are the straps that hold down the top plates to the tops of the studs. And again, you want to use straps that are at least 20 inches long, and you shear them across the top of the plate and down each side of the stud that is coming down upon, and you just nail it off. And make sure you use the correct nail specification required by the manufacturer, and fill each hole in the strap with a nail. Next slide, please. Okay, and there's, you can see straps that are coming down the face. Can you replay that, please? Coming down the face and going and attaching to the tops of the studs. So this looks fairly good here, but again, you freeze on that frame. you can clearly see that not all the holes in the straps have been filled with nails. So again, some significant errors are going on here. So every time a nail is left out, the strength of that connection is being reduced. Okay? Next slide, please. Okay, after all that's done, then you want to go ahead and build your interior walls. And when you build your walls, the interior walls can act as additional braces to your exterior walls, and help make them a bit stronger. You also want to lap the uppermost top plate of the interior walls into the top plates of the exterior perimeter walls. Again, this adds to the bracing effect and kind of locks everything together. Next slide, please. Okay, this is, we're moving on to the installation of plywood sheathing. And that shows the spacing, or about a 6-inch spacing, which is correct for along the edges of all plywoods. The spacing requires is 6 inches, and that's an 8-penny nail, which is the correct spec. So, as next slide, please. So as we're talking about the installation of plywood wall sheathing. So again, as I said earlier, the sheathing must be run with the long axis horizontally across the studs. And the sheathing must be run so that the vertical joints are staggered. All right, so you don't want your vertical joints from row to row of your sheathing to line up with each other. You want to stagger them. The sheathing is to be nailed to studs with 8-penny ring shank nails, and ring shank is required in the Bahamas building code for nailing in wall sheathings. And they are nailed in at 6 inches on center along the perimeter of each piece of sheet, and 12 inches on center along the interior supports that the sheet runs across. It is strongly recommended. Sheathing is also glued to the studs using exterior grade construction rated adhesive. It is also recommended that the sheathing is hand nailed, as use of gun nails has the considerable risk of overdriving the nail into the plywood past its outermost layers, and therefore reducing the strength of connection. Is it possible to go back to the video previous? Okay. Now, if you take a close look at that nail there, just freeze it right there, please. Okay, if you take a close look at that nail has been overdriven. It is punctured through the outside layer of the plywood. So that is something not to do. That reduces the strength of that connection and the plywood on the hole. Okay. The best thing to do is the hand nail, because that is the best way to guard against overdriving of the nails. Next slide, please. And again. Okay, that's about it. I just have a practical note, as well as with respect to framing using especially pressure-treated lumber. Pressure-treated lumber ships in with a high moisture content very commonly. And so when that lumber loses some of that moisture content to come into equilibrium without humidity, it is very common for that lumber to shrink in length. And that can happen after framing has been completed. Now, so how to address that? That shrinking can be mitigated somewhat by ordering what is called kiln-dried lumber, but that is quite a bit more expensive. Kiln-dried lumber arrives with a much lower moisture content. A less expensive way to mitigate this situation is to have the lumber come to equilibrium before it is used by framing, and that could take several weeks. So that might not work for your schedule, your construction schedule. If it can, great. If it can't, then this can be managed by at the lumber yard during the selection process by carefully hand picking lumber that is less wet. It's very easy to pick those out there. You just feel they are less wet. However, you know, it's likely that you will have walls that are framed where shrinkage will occur. And so you want to do a quality check. And after framing, to you know, look for shrinkage at key locations, such as the bearing of headers upon jack studs. If the jack studs have shrunk, the header may no longer be sitting down on top of the jack stud. So to address this, what you can do is install some shims to fit into that space. Likewise, other key joints will need checking, and if necessary, additional work like shimming to restore contact and bearing. And that is about it, ladies and gentlemen. So we're going to move on to our question and answer phase.
Yeah, Nick, Eugene, thank you both so much. Being in Abaco and Grand Bahamas so much in the months after Dorian had passed, I was constantly hearing the phrases like ring shank nails and these sorts of things that prior to that, I honestly just had no idea what they were. So it's actually really good to see that information being put out. And I feel that there is a lack of what the knowledge is, at least for us at the, not that I own a home, but at the potential homeowner level, where we're just not aware of these things. So thank you so much. We've already gotten a question in here. Cyril asks, essentially, if I want to use screws to secure the sole plate strap, what type of screws are recommended?
So the sole plate strap attaches both to the stud and possibly to the concrete. If you're talking about the attachment to the concrete, as opposed to what was in that video with the blue colored Tapcon screw. Tapcon does make a galvanized concrete screw, so you'd want to use that. I would not use screws to attach to the timber, simply because the manufacturer, unless the manufacturer has that as a legitimate connection, then I wouldn't use it, and I would use the nail specification that it requires. The bottom line is whatever the manufacturer requires for its connection, for its strap, that is what you want to use.
And Nick, or Cyril, are you unmuted now? Perfect.
Yeah, no, I said thanks, because I only seen the blue Teflon screws around, and they're pretty handy to put into the wall.
Right.
I actually don't know, the only thing you can put into the wall for the strap on the sole plate is a screw. Is that correct?
Right. Right. Yeah. Only a concrete screw will work for that. And to be honest, I really don't recommend that method. I think the straps should go up either side of each stud and not strap down to the concrete. It's not something that's covered by the manufacturer. They do not consider that sort of connection, number one. Number two, I saw damage after Dorian where straps were used in this manner, and a stud taking a blow on the outside. What would happen is the stud would basically disintegrate. It would split at the bottom. So even though the strap held, it wasn't in a configuration that helped resist blows. And a better way to resist blows is to have the strap come up either side of the stud from the bottom of the plate. If that makes sense to you.
Okay, it does. Thanks.
Okay. Now, of course, if you're already far along enough in the process where you do have to run it down the concrete slab, the face of the concrete slab and the concrete foundation block wall. Yeah, you want to use concrete screws Tapcon is a very popular choice. Tapcon does make hot dip galvanized screws, so I would definitely use that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Cyril. And also, so Nick, very similar to all of this in terms of a question about screws. Dwayne asks your thoughts on adding a screw to the straps and hurricane clips along with the nails.
Again, unless the manufacturer has it as part of the installation guide, I wouldn't do it. I do understand the thought of substituting a nail for a screw here and there, simply because screws have greater withdrawal strength. I do understand that. But once you are following the guidelines of what that particular connection is rated for, and it's and you install it per the manufacturer's guidelines to achieve that strength, it really is not necessary to consider, well, I'll substitute one nail for a screw, something like that. It doesn't really do anything for you. You just need to follow the guidelines, follow the strength guidelines per the connectors from the manufacturers, and install it as they require you to install it, and you'll be good.
Okay, I'm trying to see if there are any questions on the Facebook post. People just were noting that, again, it's good to know that their ring shanked is the strongest type. I think just for everybody who may not have been in last week's webinar, I have put into the general chat to everybody the link to the Ministry of Public Works document, which is the Guide to Housing Standards for the Bahamas, which was worked on by the incredible folks at Public Works, as well as with inputs from the DRA and UNDP. By that I mean Nick. So please do download that. You'll also see that there is a little poll running. We're just trying to get an idea of how the content we're providing is meeting your needs. So if you can just answer that in terms of your satisfaction levels with the type of content that's being put in, that would be really useful too. I am checking the Q&A section, because if not, I think that we may be, unless anybody else has a question, I don't see anybody's hands are up, but please do let me know. No. Okay. Well, that was very short and sweet. Eugene, Nick, thank you both again so much for your time and your technical insights. And to all of you who were able to join us today, thank you. Just know that if you can follow, I put up before the link, but I'll put it up here. If you do, just follow the multi-country office for UNDP. It's based out of UNDP Jamaica. So it's Facebook, UNDP Jamaica, you'll find us. You can see each new webinar that comes on, and then the recording from each webinar will pop up. Obviously, the issue with only getting the recording is you're not able to ask questions about your specific project, your reconstruction project, but do follow along so you'll know when the next one is going to be. Thank you so much, everybody. I'll let Nick and Eugene close it out.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight with us. Yeah.
We're thankful that we're almost through another hurricane season.
Right.